Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is ancestral trauma. I think it's really interesting to look at patterns of behavior and being that are passed down within families, within cultures. And so we get to look at that today. I think it should be an interesting conversation. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, and bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, energizing, electrifying, and illuminating all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, lighting you up from the inside out. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and very, very softly rub your fingers against your palms and feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling, the tingling, and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now, in these amazing bodies that are the vehicle for our experience of life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, yes, ancestral trauma. I'm thinking of this topic today because I was talking to, good morning, Rosalind. Thanks for chiming in. I so appreciate you showing up every day and everybody else who's joining us too. But Rosalind, I so appreciate you saying hello so that I know that it's all live. It's wonderful to get that confirmation. So thank you. So we're talking about ancestral trauma. And I think that we can look at that not just as ancestors, direct, lineage type ancestors, but like human ancestry, for instance. That we're all part of this big human family. And I think we learn patterns in so many ways. I think we learn emotional patterns as we grow up in our families and in our culture as well. And that we are connected to this field, the morphic field of consciousness, but and we can sense into that. I think that we also are shaped by it to a great degree, and we don't tend to recognize that. I don't think we don't tend to recognize that we are. I think we tend to experience ourselves as contained, that because we've been talking about identity and flow and connection and all of that this week. I think we tend to perceive ourselves as a unit, and with interaction with the environment, but not necessarily being actively shaped by the environment. And I think that, for instance, as children, if we're children in a family that is angry, for instance, we learn to respond to things with anger because that's how we're taught. When we're told to be quiet, or when people are modeling their modeling shutdown, for instance, then we learn shutdown. I think we don't necessarily recognize that we're entrained and trained into all kinds of behavioral responses, and that we then spend a lifetime trying to undo, I think, in many cases. And I think it's a worthy or a worthwhile perspective to take a look at the issues that we carry as issues that have been, in many cases, issues that have been given us as we were growing up, as we were being taught about living. So when we are, and I'm not talking just about like the trauma that we might experience growing up in a dysfunctional household, for example. I'm talking about the emotional patterns themselves. So, for instance, we may have an issue. Let's say we have, good morning, Dennis. Good to have you back. We're talking about ancestral trauma, and what I'm trying to get at, not very artfully yet this morning, but what I'm trying to get at is that there are patterns, for instance, within a family or within a culture even, of suffering, for instance. So let's say one of the issues in my life had been suffering, and when I looked at or when I look at my family, generations and generations, it was about suffering in so many ways, like that this perspective on the world is a perspective that is passed from generation to generation. And I think I'm seeing this in myself, in my clients, that they're I'm trying to think of an example. So an example is, you probably, good morning, Bernadette. So good to have you here with us. We're talking about generational and ancestral trauma. So I think that we tend to repeat the patterns of generations in some way or another, that there's an imprint. So for instance, my dad and his sister, generational pass downs. Thank you, Bernadette. So my dad and his sister had a challenged relationship, and my brother and I have moved through, thankfully, but have had a very challenged relationship as well. And I see these patterns, that are not necessarily, they're not overt, they're not spoken. Bernadette, you're chiming in, so I know you're relating to what I'm saying, even though I'm not finding the right words to make it really ring today. But when you're talking about generational pass downs, what are you talking about? So, like, for example, ow, Maggie again biting my feet. This time she flew up into the air to bite my foot that was crossed. Oh, my legs were crossed. Anyway, so thank you. Bernadette says, we learn what we're taught to be our family norms. Exactly. So I think that, what is a really good example is prejudices. Prejudices are taught, right? These are, and the thing is that in a family that we grow up in, we don't, as children, we don't have the perspective to know that this is not truth, or this is not fact, this is not normal even. We just have our dynamic in our families, and we learn behaviors, and that goes generation to generation to generation. We learn behaviors, we learn beliefs, and the traumas that have been experienced in prior generations, I believe, are carried forward in those emotional patterns. And Bernadette says, interesting. Okay, so Bernadette says, I interview people of adoption and have found several interesting moments. Do genes dictate how we behave? I love that question. I love that question. And the interesting, that brings to mind some twin studies. There are studies that have been done on twins that were separated at birth and raised in completely different environments. And when these twins found each other again, what was discovered, or when these twins were compared, what was discovered is that there were tremendous similarities in their lives, in their way of being, in their preferences, and all kinds of other things. So it's an interesting question. I don't think it's just something about genes. I think that, our science wants to make it something as concrete as genes, but that there are maybe energetic signatures also that are passed down from generation to generation, energetically, biologically, maybe in some way, maybe it's in the blood, maybe, but there's some kind of energetic thing that maybe goes way beyond genes too. That's such a good conversation, interesting conversation. And I'm not schooled in the Bernadette says, oh, LOL, I'm a twin separated at birth, and I'm still looking for her, for your twin. That's great. So I think that here's what I had a client who's just awesome and had a lot of issues around self-expression and frustration and anger. And she said, well, I see that my mom has the same, like these are the behaviors in my mom that I can't stand, and now I see myself doing them. And what we got to discover or discuss was that she had had a really good teacher in how to do these behaviors, because that's exactly what her mom did, and her mom taught her well. And I think that that's kind of getting to the heart of what I want to address, that before we enable ourselves to become conscious and deliberate and reflective on ourselves and our lives, and until we evidence a commitment to growth and evolution, and even then sometimes we are at the effect of these patterns that we inherit. And the problem is that we tend to make it about ourselves. We tend to make it about our own failures or inadequacies without recognizing where that behavior or tendency came from. And when we can recognize, oh my gosh, I had a really good teacher, and it was something that was programmed in from an early time, then perhaps we can give ourselves a little bit more distance and a little bit more grace in moving through those patterns. So Bernadette says, but we're all adults now and have a choice to change those patterns. Knowledge is knowing. Absolutely. So once we see something, exactly, Bernadette, once we see it, we can be empowered to shift it. Now, the thing is, I think that it also empowers us to shift these things when we can recognize that they're not innately our own, that we were taught that behavior. And so we can identify it. We can kind of dissociate ourselves from it in a way. And with that bit of distance, it can give us a greater capacity to make that shift, to recognize it when we don't over compound it by guilt and shame, etc., around that behavior, because that just piles on all the negativity and all the resistance. And I guess what I'm saying is that maybe by allowing ourselves to distance ourselves a bit from the guilt or shame or whatever, of having this behavior, we can distance ourselves from that, because of course we have that behavior, and then we can see it as a behavior to shift, not as a lack of moral character, for example, if that makes some sense. So Bernadette says we can't change what we don't know. Exactly. So awareness is the key to first be able to recognize something. And part of the challenge, I think, in recognizing some of these patterns and behaviors is that we personalize it, that we think we are the behavior, or that behavior is well, we judge it. We judge ourselves, and we are often very, very harsh critics and harsh judges upon ourselves. And so when we can kind of neutralize all that energy, that resistance, that the judgment that's laid on top, if we can strip that off, then it makes the behavior itself more accessible. At least that's what I believe, because we can forgive ourselves, and we don't even, or realize that we don't even have to forgive ourselves, that's what's there. And then we can deal with it more objectively. At least that's what I'm thinking. And I think, there are patterns that we learn, for instance, even patterns around money. And we learn we get all kinds of messaging around money that is probably passed down from generation to generation. And without conscious intervention, these things stay in force. Right. And so to Bernadette's point, we get to raise our awareness of these things so that then we can address them. So Bernadette says, I think when it comes with an expectation of who we think we should be, it doesn't allow us to be our true selves. Exactly. So what we're talking about is these cultural norms that get passed down and get laid over our individual expression. So I watched I think it was like a commencement ceremony where Jim Carrey, the comedian, was the keynote speaker, and he was brilliant, really brilliant. And he was talking about how his dad could have been a comedian, but he decided to do the responsible thing and got a job that he didn't like. And then when Jim Carrey was 12 years old, he lost the job. And the message was, you can do things, you can, I'm going to use the word fail, but we know about failure being something that's in all about perspective. You can fail at doing something that you don't like. So why not try doing something you do like? Why not allow yourself that freedom? And the thing is that notion of responsibility, for instance, where we inherit these ideas of what's responsible and how we should be. And this is to your point, Bernadette, is that we get these expectations of how we should be. And Bernadette says, always follow your passions. Well, that's really what we're talking about. And actually, before you can follow your passions, you have to find your passion. And so many of us have grown into or grown up in a culture of the way we should be, and the way life should be for that matter, but how we should be and what's important, and get a good education so you can get a good job or whatever, for all kinds of expectations that subvert us from our truest expression. And what we're looking to do is to free ourselves from these generational patterns and cultural patterns to be able to connect more deeply with our authentic self. That's really what we're looking to do, because this is a new world and it has new requirements, and the survival mechanisms of the past are not necessarily going to carry us into the future. In fact, we can pretty much bet that they won't, because it's a whole new world. And so as it's a whole new world and we're experiencing things never before experienced on the planet with great urgency, we are called forth to be more responsive, more creative, more present than ever before. And essentially, I think I know I spoke earlier in the week about how over the weekend I had this deep experience of despair that it wasn't from me. It wasn't anything going on in my life. I really believe that it was tapping into the field and experiencing that. And the point of this conversation really is for each of us to recognize that we have the capacity to be shifting, not only ourselves, but as we shift ourselves, we shift the field. And that's really what we need to do in order to ensure a future for humanity on this planet. So Bernadette says cultural pattern can help us and also hinder personal growth. Exactly. So being part of a collective is something that we all need. We all need support, and we all need connection. And those connections can often, as you're saying, Bernadette, provide all kinds of controls and constraints that can be very limiting. And it's a delicate balance to be a free thinker in the midst of social pressure. And I know that many of us are experiencing that challenge these days. There is tremendous social pressure to behave in certain ways, to believe certain things. And it's interesting because historically, the people making discoveries have been vilified when those discoveries buck the common trend or the common belief. For instance, when it was discovered that the Earth revolved around the sun rather than that the Earth was the center of the world, that was heresy. And the power of the crowd can be vicious, absolutely vicious, and of collective groupthink can be really, really threatening. And so in a time when we're called upon more than ever to be independent thinkers, to be sovereign thinkers, conscious thinkers, and reasoned and connected, all of that, it's very, very challenging to navigate the social environment. And I think the more we heal ourselves, the more we release ourselves from the programmed patterns, the better equipped we'll be to be responsive rather than reactive. Bernadette says, I think it goes hand in hand with what we want to believe, what resonates with our soul. I think that what we want to believe and what resonates with our soul may not always be the same thing. And we don't always get to believe what we want to believe. I do think that we get to navigate those beliefs and shift them to be more life affirming. But it's not always the easiest thing in the world. So anyway, I'm still kind of noodling around with these ideas. But I think it's an important thing for us to look at and to give ourselves grace when we're experiencing certain things, certain emotions, for example, that feel like they're beyond us. Anyway, I've got to go because I have a client. So I'm going to wrap it up. I'm Mira Rubin. This is The Core Connection. I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I'm so grateful to you for joining me here and engaging in these conversations. It brightens my day. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And lots and lots of love. Until next time. So I will see you again really soon.